So, funnily enough, I was in this exact room and the moment that I took the call that changed my life. It was January and the late afternoon was streaming in through these blinds. She's going off to sex addiction after all. Was streaming through these blinds. It was so hot that the sun was definitely beating the air conditioning. And I was watching two coaches who had practiced and practiced and practiced their coaching skills in preparation for their upcoming exams. And I was writing down every word that the coaches said as they practiced again. And I told myself that it was so that I could give them good, grounded feedback. But in reality, it was to keep my drooping eyelids open. And what I remember at that moment is that my phone buzzed twice. So I snuck a peek, which I shouldn't really have done as the facilitator. And it was 2 missed calls from my husband. And in our family, 2 missed calls means phone back, it's urgent and important. So I snuck out the room and I phoned my husband. Our son, our 15-year-old son Joshua, was sick, really sick. So sick that my husband and the GP had already organized an oncologist's appointment for the following morning. And he went off to hospital, and over the next 3 weeks, he endured stomach hemorrhages. 9 units of blood were pumped into his body, having 3 transfusions at a time to try and beat the hemorrhaging. He had a liver biopsy, he had endless blood tests. And after about 2 weeks, we were ushered into a tiny, cold, dark room with no windows. And I remember the oncologist pushing the table so that she could get in and it hitting me in the stomach. And she slapped down an exam pad on the table and scribbled some words and said to Shannon and I, it's not good news. Joshua has been diagnosed with adenocarcinoma, and the pathologists are still fighting amongst themselves, but you should consider it cholangiocarcinoma. And then she pushed the table back into my stomach again, got up, walked out of the room, leaving the piece of paper behind, and said over her shoulder, this would be a good time to do your bucket list items. Is there anyone here who knows what cholangiocarcinoma actually is? It's bile duct cancer. And I'm glad that you asked me to explain, because I'm going to give you some cancer facts now, which I promise are important for the story. So cholangiocarcinoma is actually what is called a geriatric cancer. The vast majority of people who are diagnosed with it are 60 years and over. In fact, there has only ever been 5 documented cases of a teenager or a child contracting it. And it is incredibly rare. So at any given time, there are 8,000 people living with cholangiocarcinoma. And I use the word living with deliberately because it's an incredibly aggressive cancer. In the cancer world, we measure your likelihood, your mortality rates, and your likelihood of surviving for 5 years. And they are so low that statistically they are 0. So at any given time, for every person who's diagnosed, there's quite a lot who've gone. And I want to just put that into perspective for you. So every year in the United States alone, 250,000 people are diagnosed with breast cancer per year. So it is incredibly rare. And the truth of the matter is that the pediatric oncologists had no idea how to treat an aggressive terminal geriatric cancer. And they sent my son Joshua home about a week later with instructions to help manage his pain and call our family together. The oncologists themselves wouldn't give me an answer about how long we had, but eventually I managed to get hold of the amazing Professor Loveland, who had done the biopsy of Josh's liver, and he sat with us and he tearfully told me about 2 months without treatment. And so we were left in this situation where we didn't know what to do. We sent our kids, we sent our kid home, we went home and we prepared for him to die. And that is where we get the first unlikely hero of our story. So this boy here is Prashanth Padiachi, and he is Joshua's best friend. Not happy enough for you. This is Prashanth Padiachi, and he is Joshua's best friend. And Prashanth happens to come from a medical family. His mom is a world-renowned neurologist. His father is a very popular GP. His sister is a fifth-year medical student. And when Prashanth heard that we had sent Joshua home with no treatment plan, he went on strike. He didn't come out of bed, he didn't eat, he didn't drink, he didn't go to school, he wouldn't speak to his family. And when his mother finally got access to him and asked him what the hell was going on, he said to her, "You dare not call yourself a doctor if you will let my best friend die without a fight." And at that moment, two streams, parallel streams, kicked off. The first was that his sister, the medical student, started reading every oncology journal she could get her hands on. And wherever she found a peer-reviewed article on cholangiocarcinoma, she passed it on to her mother, Marla, who used her credentials as this world-renowned neurologist to make contact with these doctors and find out what they said. At the same time, she was phoning just about every oncology clinic here in Johannesburg and in Cape Town to get from them an answer that they would treat Josh, and she was turned away again and again and again. And at the same time as she was doing this, I did what every parent does when they're faced with something they don't know. I went to the internet and I stumbled across, luckily, a Facebook group called the Cholangiocarcinoma Caregivers Support Group. And overnight, Josh inherited about 500 new grandparents who became heavily invested, and they all said the same thing to me: get him in treatment now. Don't wait. There isn't time to wait. And they also gave me advice on what are the things that I should be asking an oncologist. What are the potential treatments that are out there that can help people survive? What are the trials that are going on where there has been some limited success at least? And this is where the second heroes of our story enter. Finally, Marla managed to persuade Dr. Rappaport from the Rosebank Medical Oncology Center to see us. By the time we got to this, it's a very busy clinic. It was 9 o'clock on a Friday night. You can imagine this child who's got 0 red blood count, so he is perpetually tired, sitting there until 9 o'clock on a Friday night to see the oncologist. And Dr. Rappaport said to us, "You know, if you were 50, I would be giving you the same advice as you've already received. But you're 15. We have to give it a go." And he assigned a doctor, who is our great hero, to be his primary oncologist, called Bronwyn van Eerden. And I will never forget the first time that Bronwyn and Josh met. Josh was still in hospital having another blood transfusion, and Bronwyn came in when they were about to kick off Josh's first set of chemotherapy. And she said to Josh, "Josh, do you understand what palliative treatment means?" And Josh said, "Yes. It means that you're not trying to cure me. It means that you're just trying to help me live longer and have a better quality of life." And she said, "Yes, you're quite right." And then she said to him, "You know, I don't have children of my own. And I have actually never treated a child. We're an adult clinic. So if you feel at any time that I am talking down to you or I am sending things over your head, I'm really looking to you to tell me about that." And then she turned to Josh and she said, "Josh, do you have any questions?" Well, in fact, she didn't. I've missed something out. She said, "You know, I don't have kids, but I do have dogs." And then she asked Josh, "Do you have any questions?" And Josh smiled and replied and said, "Have you got any pictures of your dogs?" And my memory that sits in my mind and I think about all the time is Bronwyn and Josh sitting side by side in a hospital bed for about 2 hours whilst I don't know what was happening for the other oncology patients, and looking at their pictures of their dogs and telling stories of their fur babies. So this picture is of Joshua 363 days later after diagnosis. So Bronwyn was an extraordinary person, and we didn't know it at the time, because if I compare her with the pediatric oncologist, there had been the expert and the patient, and our role was to listen to the expert and do what they told us to do. Bronwyn was an extraordinary specialist because she was open to suggestions and questions from a well-meaning but uninformed source. That's me. And every week when we went in to see her, I would say, "But what about this and what about that?" And the guys in the US have told me about the Cleveland Clinic's special second opinion service, where one of the big cancer hospitals in the US will take all your biopsies and your blood, and they will re-diagnose and provide an unseen treatment plan to the patients, and then provide that back to your oncologist to see how well they meet. And when she read the Cleveland Clinic's treatment plan, it was almost the same as hers, but they were being much more aggressive with bringing in radiation treatment into the mix. And Josh met with the radiation oncologist the next day. And that, for me, got me thinking about what is the role of a specialist and an expert, because we tend to have these experts up here and us down here, and yet something terrific can happen when we become equals. And that's really what kicked this story off. So Joshua, one of the things that the oncologist team told me afterwards was that they had set themselves targets. So when Josh first went to see them, it was about March, and they were going to get him to Easter. And then once Easter had passed, they were going to get him to his birthday in August. And as we came towards the end, and we knew we were coming to the end, Josh wanted to go on the school camp to Sugar Bay. So Josh was a student of Crawford College, and their big deal is that in the first days of grade 10, you go to Sugar Bay in Zinkwazi and you go to camp together. And it was something that Josh had wanted to do from the day we had first thought about Crawford as a choice of high school. But by then, he was too weak to walk across the sand to go kayaking with his mates. So his friend said to me, no problem. Get him to the car park. We will meet you there and we'll sort it out and we will paddle him and we will take him kayaking. And this is his friends carrying him in a kayak to the lagoon so that they could take him kayaking with them. There's one small problem in that most of his friends had decided to take AP Maths instead of Geography, so they promptly set off for Madagascar, not the lagoon. But once they'd got that right, he had a really, really spectacular afternoon. And I remember before he went to bed that night, he said, I think this could have been the best day of my life. And he died 15 hours later, painlessly and quickly from a brain hemorrhage. But it's a good way to go out, isn't it? But we don't all have to feel sad, because this is a picture of my very much alive son, Christopher. He is 15 now, and he has already a thriving business providing home maintenance services to our friends and family. I'll give you his number afterwards if you need him. But his real passion is home automation. And home automation is something that didn't even exist 2 years. In fact, do you guys know what home automation is? So home automation, well, let me explain it using what Chris has actually done over the last few months. So about 3 months ago, our security system was hit by lightning and it took out everything. So Christopher, egged on by our security specialist Darren, decided it was time for an upgrade. And so now, from our cell phones and Chris's cell phone, he can watch live and recorded footage of our gate, our driveway, and even the third camera which he has installed looking into the garden so that he and my husband can watch the dogs during the day. He can open and shut our front gate by phoning it. He can assign a one-off number for somebody who needs to get into the house for an emergency once. And he is in the process of, yesterday his motorized blinds arrived, and he is in the process of linking them to the same system. And he does all of this from the comfort of his Afrikaans class. His Afrikaans grades aren't that good, to be fair. But he learned all this maybe in the Afrikaans class. But where do you think he learned the information? Where do you think he got the information to do this from? The University of YouTube. So, and it's one of the problems that we are facing as a family. This time next year, Chris will be asked to make a decision about what, if any, tertiary education he wants to pursue. But you guys didn't even know what it was. So even in a world with no bureaucracy, we have come across a problem where our educational institutions cannot keep up with the pace of change that we are seeing. And guys, this is not happening in Silicon Valley. This is happening in Birdhaven. Have any of you ever been to Birdhaven? Yeah? Well, then you'll back me up when I say nothing ever happens in Birdhaven. Am I right? It is, yeah, we are the youngest family in Birdhaven by about 500 years. So this isn't happening in kind of technological centers. This is happening right here and right now. And it leaves our students with a massive problem. So this is the second thing that I started thinking about. I started thinking about, hang on a moment, we have to question the role of experts, but also we have to now not only question that when we're talking about rare diseases or unknown diseases, we have to question that in our primary and our secondary and our tertiary education systems. And the problem that we have is that the entire system was developed, gosh, when did Oxford and Cambridge start? 600-700 years ago? Do you know why a degree was started? A degree creates a barrier to entry. Yep. A degree stops or allows people to know the difference between someone who has and someone who hasn't. And actually nothing has changed in the intervening period. A few years ago I was lucky enough to head up the coaching for about 100 graduates who had recently joined a bank. And their number one complaint to me as their coach was, I spent 3, 4, 5 years studying, and you've brought me into this bank, and you have made me an administrator. I am not using a single skill that I learnt in my degree in this world of work. And that is not unusual. But it doesn't just stop at things that are happening now. For the whole of my life, we have had these intractable global crises. And I'm actually older than I look. So think about things like the crisis in the Middle East. Think about the difference between rich and poor. We have global warming. We have the problem of understanding which is better for the environment, a bamboo straw or a steel straw. Hang on a moment. You saw what I did there, right? But let me choose one that's not going to make us argue, except in my family. And actually, one of the videographers are actually family, so you guys aren't allowed to say anything. In our family, we are split and heavily divided on the issue of Brexit. You all know what I mean when we're talking about Brexit? Okay. So 4 years ago, the British public, in a referendum, were asked to make a decision about whether to stay in the European Union or to leave the European Union. And by a very narrow margin, they vote to leave. And 4 years later, with all the experts available to us in the world, and all the leaders in the Europe, we have only established one thing. And that is that the British public, whether they were stayers or leavers, did not have enough information at the time of the referendum to make an informed decision. So I look at all of this and I go, hang on a moment, something's wrong here when we have medical crises and the relationship is not one of equality between the expert and the patient. Something's wrong in our education system because we can't keep up with the pace of change. But not only that, it's been wrong for a long, long time. I'm not quite as old as Cambridge, but it's been with us a long time. There we go. And it strikes me that when it comes to what we are learning and what is happening in the world, even me standing here at the front, we've brought a knife to a gunfight in the world. Because whether it is your primary degree, it's a master's degree, it's a PhD, they don't appear to be helping us solve these issues. And it doesn't mean whether they're old issues or new issues. Now, the truth of the matter is that we don't have to look much further than the orange-faced leader of the Western world to admit that social media has its issues. But let me ask you this. If you want to know how to fold a fitted sheet, where do you look? YouTube. I wanted to know, how do you treat cholangiocarcinoma, bile duct cancer? Where did I go? Facebook. So I keep asking myself, hang on a moment. This is where we are learning. This is where our kids are learning. And is it making the world of formal education irrelevant? Would we be better spending time and energy on these platforms or whatever platforms come next than in the way that we have in this 700-year-old system that was designed to keep people out of the job market? So I want to ask you guys now, who here has watched the Brené Brown special on Netflix? Yeah? I'm going to put 2 hands up because I've watched it a lot. Yeah? But for those of you who are not Brené Brown fans, like us, let me tell you, she is one of the preeminent world researchers in the world of shame. And what Brené Brown would say to you is that shame is one of the primary things that stops us changing our behavior, stops us moving forward. So, you know, when you listen to 702 and they go, let's shame drunk drivers, the one thing that we have guaranteed is that they will drive drunk again and again, because shame says you are a bad person. Guilt says you made a bad choice. So shame is a really evil feeling to impose on someone. But what Brené Brown also says is the opposite and the antidote to shame is living what she calls a wholehearted life. And what I call, as somebody who spent most of my adult life studying the effects of happiness on productivity and well-being, I'd call it living a happy life. And she says the thing about a wholehearted life is that if we want one, and it is our ticket to feeling great, it means that we need to make ourselves vulnerable. And our system vulnerable, I suppose. And she says, and I'm going to read it, I'm going to keep this with me in case I forget a word. But what Brené Brown said is, the quote that kicked this all off for her came from Teddy Roosevelt. And for those of you who watched the special, I just want you to know, I had this on my Facebook profile before she even did her first TED Talk. But how the quote goes is, it is not the critic who counts. It is not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled or the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, his face marred with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcomings. But who does actually do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, so that at best, in the end, he will know the triumph of great achievement. And at worst, if he loses, will have failed while daring greatly, so that his place will never be among the cold and timid souls of those who neither know victory nor defeat. And so far today with you guys, I've been sitting in the stands, haven't I? So let me be vulnerable with you. I am not an education specialist. I'm not a chemotherapist. I'm making all these points about something being wrong, but I'm doing it from the stands so far. So let me jump into the arena and be even more vulnerable with you. Is having thought about this again and again over the last few years, the decision that I made was that me standing here giving a talk to you, it's nice, but will it change anything? You know, I'm hesitant to even say, oh, I'm an expert in this business of happiness. I'll rather just say it's my passion. So what I have just finished doing is a 5-week course on how to manage YouTube. And this is the bit where I have to be really vulnerable. So far, I have published 2 YouTube videos on the subject of happiness, of the things that I have spent the last decade and a half studying and teaching people and being paid much better than YouTube will ever pay me to tell them about. I have 33 subscribers, and on my first video, 114 people watched it. I think 113 of them were my family, and I was the last one. And I am turning all my material that I have gleaned over the last few years into YouTube videos so that they are available, and online courses for people who want to take them. And this is my invitation to you. Join me in the arena. Even if, you've got another subscriber. Woo! Thank you. Even if the person in the arena already is a dirty-faced woman in a Batman t-shirt. Thank you. Are there any questions? No? You don't want to know my son's number? He's really, really good, I promise you. Okay, guys, has everyone put their name and their email address on the list? Okay. Are you sure you don't have a question? Because I have to have a gift for someone with a question. Aha! Ah!
Your work on happiness, can you only track it or follow it on YouTube, or are there any other platforms?
So I'm on YouTube, and I'm on Facebook, and I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay, we'll just check for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not ranking well on Facebook and YouTube. But join my group on Facebook, because you'll be amongst my 33 friends. Yes.
Thank you for sharing your beautiful, vulnerable story with us.
Thank you.
And I wanted to ask you, when did this journey start, and when did you decide to make the change and reinvent yourself?
So that's a really good question. I had a problem. So it started in January 2017 is when Josh got sick. And the weird thing was that in December 2016, he had been skiing. So he went from this active, and he was the kid who arrived at school. So at Crawford, if you get colours in 3 or 4 disciplines, they will give you a white blazer when you're in matric, right? And he was the kid who arrived in grade 8 and went straight to the office and said, what are the criteria for a white blazer? He was that kid, you know. Prashant wasn't that kid. Prashant goes to school 40% of the time at best. But he's clever enough to swing into to get by. But what was happening then is that I was doing a ton of coaching and teaching for big corporates about this happiness and productivity, and a lot in the motor industry, which meant that I was away from home half the year. And I had spoken again and again and again about values being important to our happiness, and that my primary value was family. And I usually said that from a city where my family wasn't. So on the day that Josh got sick, and we got the diagnosis that it would be a terminal illness, it took me 2 seconds to make the decision to close down my practice, and about 4 hours to palm off the work to other coaches and associates who I knew that could carry through on a whole lot of the projects. And it was good timing from that perspective, because the motor industry work had a particular calendar, and we were between sort of semesters, right? And then when Josh passed away, so I then gave up everything so that I could be with Josh in that time. And when he died in January 2018, 2 things actually happened. So the first was that, and it explains, who asked about the Batman t-shirt? Yeah. So all those coaches who I had been trying to emulate, all those experts who I wanted to be like them. I was one of those people who I wanted to be like, I wanted people to go, oh, she's an elite coach, you know, a name, you know. And on the day of Josh's memorial, all those people, that entire network of coaches in Johannesburg, so let's say I had a network of, say, 200 coaches. How many of them do you think arrived at my son's memorial?
Very few, 0.
3. They were all busy that day. So it was my one moment of need. And that was like, well, why am I trying so hard to be in that world? So that was the moment I gave away all the trappings of that world. And the Batman t-shirt is because Josh was a massive DC Comics fan. He didn't believe in an afterlife, but if there is an afterlife, I promise you, Stan Lee is having the most boring time as my son explains to him in exquisite detail why DC is better than Marvel. And then there was also the consequences of that, where I was, you know, I'm actually not well enough to hold the space for somebody in that world. So if somebody comes to me and has a real issue, I don't have that mental fortitude at the moment. And it was at that point that I decided to put myself under a psychiatrist's care until I could feel jolly again. So this is actually only the second time I have been out. I mean, I don't mean physically out, but I mean like done a speech since Josh died, because it's the first time I felt like actually I could cope. Did I answer the question, or did I just tell you a story? Yeah, so that's what's made me change. And I feel like, well, if I go back and I can make, you know, a dealer principal in a motor dealership feel like this much better, or I can be on YouTube and I can help a lot of people feel better who don't have the means for that, you know. I still have to figure out how to make a living from it, but but that was my thinking on it. Are there any other questions? You still don't want to know about my son's business? Okay, cool. All right, so where is the list of email addresses and... Aha. So we will ask my totally unbiased videographer, Ev, to close her eyes and...
Blank, sorry.
Go close, go for... Take your glasses off and try, because then the names will be blurry.
Sure, we go. Dylan.
Dylan, yay! So Dylan, what you have won is, actually this was from my husband, who was given it today but is on a diet. And you have also won 3 books. So Cultivating Happiness, which is, it's not a sad memoir, it's a funny memoir on all the, like, how I failed at yoga and meditating and all those good things that we do. Cure is the story that my son told me before he died. In November, he told me he wanted to write a science fiction story, and I made notes. So I wrote it up for him posthumously, which is, well, when you get to the end, you'll see. And in here is your token to get my How to Be Happy at Work ebook. It's not a real book yet. And you have a beautiful pink diary, because my brand colors are pink. And there is a lid for it. And you asked me a wonderful question, so Ev, won't you dig out, would you prefer a book to read or a diary to write in? A book to read. Don't you want to grab a copy of Cure and Cultivating Happiness out of there for me? You see, it pays to ask questions. And Cure. Sorry. I think I've gone way over my time, have I? Am I over the limit? Okay, cool. There you go. So you too have, you are most welcome. Thank you so much, guys, for coming. I'm so thrilled that you came here, not to the sex addiction one. Thank you very much indeed.